All right, well, good morning. So, this week is a continuation of last week. And just to kind of get you wrapped around what we're on, is this idea that we've been fighting, we feel like we've been fighting the same fight our entire life. It's a sentiment I've encountered in a number of people, and other ministers have reported the same phenomenon with their congregants, that people will get to be a certain point in their life and they go, man, I'm 50, 60, 70 years old, and I feel like I've been dealing with the same thing my entire life. Have I made any spiritual progress for all the fighting that I've had to do over these things? And what I was trying to illustrate last week was that we're not actually fighting against, we actually are fighting against different hells. That as time passes, we start off, we fight these lowest hells, and we conquer them, and we move to higher hells, and eventually, it can work out to where you're actually fighting against the angels as you're trying to ascend higher and higher in your spiritual process. So you actually are making progress. You are fighting against different things, but what makes it feel like you haven't made any progress is that the ruling love hasn't changed. And so you're fighting for the same thing. It just manifests itself in different ways. So I think that's kind of where that feeling of, I've been fighting the same thing all my life. Well, if your ruling love has been the same for a long time, yeah, you have been fighting for the same thing all your life. Maybe you're fighting for a love for the Lord. Well, the opposite to that is love of control and dominating others. So, if that's your thing, yeah, you might be fighting for that a long time. Love of marriage is the middle one, and love of obedience and disobedience is the next pairing. So that can last a long time. Well, one of the bits of research around this topic that I was doing led me to the topic and doctrine of hereditary evils. And what I was finding is just that I don't know that we give enough credit for how insidious and how difficult it is to remove hereditary evil. The traditional Christian world actually, promotes this doctrine pretty strongly, in the sense that they'll say, oh, well, Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, and because of his sin, he doomed us all. And that's why God had to come and save us, because his sin doomed us thousands of years into the future. And while the new church doesn't believe that that is the case in a literal sense, I think that there's perhaps a bit more to it than we normally give credit to, that the hereditary evils can compound and last generations and generations. And what we're going to show here today in the story from Genesis is that, well, yeah, it looks like in the case of Jewish history, these hereditary evils were compounded over hundreds and even thousands of years. I take from that it's really difficult to remove these things. And it's not to say that nobody can, you surely can, but it is going to take a concerted effort to do so. And so when you feel like you're fighting the same fight all your life, it's part of that mechanism is because of the rooting a family has in certain behaviors. So with that as the intro, let's get into the story. The story is not in the order of service. I'm just going to kind of walk you through it so we can spend some time on the arcana passage that goes with it. The story is from Genesis chapter 38, and it's known as the story of Judah and Tamar. And here's how the story goes. We have Judah. So I'm going to have a family tree up here for you guys to help you follow along. So Judah marries Shua. Now, as we just said to the boys, you're supposed to not marry Canaanite women. So this is where the whole thing starts to go wrong. And we see this marrying foreign women never works out for the children of Israel. And this is the same case here. So Judah marries Shua, who's a Canaanite woman. And Shua bears Judah 3 children, the first of which is and then Onan, and then Shelah. Okay? Well, eventually needs a wife. So marries Tamar. God says, this is this text speaking, not me. God says is a bad man. So gets killed off. He's dead. So Tamar then has to marry the next brother, which is Onan. So she gets with him. Well, Onan doesn't like the fact that if he impregnates Tamar, he's going to have to raise these sons, these children, as if they're Er's, because is the firstborn, so any children born to his wife are his. So Onan refuses to impregnate Tamar. God says, this is bad, you're an evil brother, you are going to die. So dies, or Onan dies. And what is supposed to happen here is that Tamar becomes Shelah's wife. But there's one wrinkle. Shelah's not old enough to have a wife. So Judah says, Tamar, just live in our household, stay with us until Shelah's old enough, and then you can be his wife. Well, time passes, and Shua, Judah's wife, dies. Judah mourns for his wife. The mourning as in like sadness and grief, comes to the end. And one day Judah is walking home and he sees this prostitute in the field. And he says, let's make a transaction here. The prostitute agrees. And the price for the services is a young goat. Prostitute says, well, how do I know you're going to deliver this goat for me? And he says, well, here, I'll give you my staff and my seal as collateral. Okay. Business is transacted. Judah comes back with this goat. The girl's nowhere to be found. So Judah says to the people around, well, where's the prostitute who's on the hill? I owe her this goat. And they're like, we haven't seen any prostitute. So Judah goes away back with his goat and says, well, all right, well, what am I to do? Well, comes out a few months later that Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar, is pregnant. Well, it turns out that it's Judah who's the one who's impregnated her, and it's revealed as they're ready to kill her. Tamar brings out Judah's seal and staff saying, that was you. And Judah's like, oh no, you're a better person than me. And Tamar delivers two children, Perez and Zerah, to Judah.
Wait, twins?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So what this is showing us, and what this number we're about to read says, is that if you look at the origins of the tribe of Judah, a third of them, comes from a Canaanite mother. That's no good. And the 2/3 come from an illicit relationship between a father and a daughter-in-law. And that's not good either. So, with that in mind, let's turn our attention to Secrets of Heaven, number 4818. And we'll read through this and see how this kind of plays out, because suffice it to say, it's not good. It says, the descent of the whole Jewish nation from these three sons of Judah is evident from the list of Jacob's sons and grandsons who accompanied him into Egypt, and also from the grouping of them into families referred to in Moses. The sons of Judah, according to their families, were of Shelah, the family of the Shelites, of Perez, the family of Perizzites, and Zerah, the family of Zarhites. From the nature of that nation's origin is evident. That is to say, 1/3 of them were descended from a Canaanite mother and 2/3 from a daughter-in-law. They were all, therefore, the product of an illicit union, because marriages to the daughters of the Canaanites were strictly forbidden, while lying with a daughter-in-law was a capital offense, as in evidence in Moses. Here from Leviticus, as regards a man who has lain with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be killed, for they have committed perversion. Their blood shall be upon them. What Judah and his daughter-in-law had done together was linked by him to the law regarding Levitical marriages, which lays down the duty of a brother but never a father. Judah's linking of their deed together to this law implies that the sons of Tamar were to be recognized as the sons of Er, the firstborn, who was born from the Canaanite mother, who was evil in Jehovah's eyes and therefore made to die. Just to be clear, he's talking about Er was the evil one to die. For initially those born in a Levitical marriage did not belong to the one from whom they had been conceived, but to him whose seed was being raised up. Furthermore, when the sons of Tamar, whom Tamar bore, were the result of whoredom, for when Judah went into her, he thought she was a prostitute. From all this, one can see that the origin of the Jewish nation and what kind of origin this was, and one can see that their words in John were founded on a lie. So here you have this line from John. It says, the Jews said to him, Jesus, we are not born of whoredom. And it's part of an exchange between the Jews and Jesus as to who Jesus is. And it comes up that the Jews say, well, we're the sons of Abraham. And Jesus says, no, you're not. Because Abraham wouldn't be behaving and doing the things that you're doing. Abraham would have believed me. Abraham would have followed me. You guys are not sons of Abraham. And so then the Jews say, what? We are not sons of whoredom. And what Secrets of Heaven is saying is, well, actually, yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. As regards what that origin implies and what it represents, this is evident from what follows. That is to say, those people's interiors were the same or had the same origin. Judah's marriage to a Canaanite implies and represents an origin that consisted in evil begotten by falsity, springing from evil. For this is what is meant in the internal sense by the daughter of a man, a Canaanite. And his lying through whoredom with this daughter-in-law implies and represents condemnation due to truth falsified by evil, for throughout the word, whoredom means falsification of truth. If you get into this story and look at on a detailed level, what it's saying is Er, the first son, represents false believing, false teachings. Onan, the second son who dies, represents an evil, so an evil action that comes out of the false beliefs. And then the last son, Shelah, represents idolatry. Because you're doing evil, got a false belief, it leads to evil actions, which leads to worshiping idols. That's kind of the chain of event that it's trying to describe here. Evil begotten by falsity, so Onan. Springing from evil is an evil life, resulting from false teaching hatched by the evil of self-love. That is, by those governed by this evil and backed up by a use of the sense of the letter of the word. This is what the origin of the evil in the Jewish nation is like. All right, now look at that. I mean, he's not talking about symbolism there. He's saying, these guys are like this. And what the origin of the evil is like in the Christian world, especially among those meant in the word by Babel. So he's taking this hereditary evil and stretching it out thousands of years into the future. It's not just about Jews from 2,000, 3,000 years ago. He's like, look, no, this is what's meant in the Christian world. The nature of that evil is such that it closes every path leading into the eternal man, closing every path so completely that no conscience at all can be formed there. For if any evil done by a person is due to false teaching, he believes that this is good because he believes that it is true. He accordingly does it because he has warrant to do so, with a sense of freedom and delight. And this being so, heaven is closed so completely against him that it cannot be opened. So this is a tough place to be in when heaven cannot be opened. We rely on that connection, and so if you've closed that off through to hereditary tendencies and beliefs and actions, you're in a world of hurt. And so what he's showing here is like, okay, the hereditary evil starts with Judah and his sons, and then he rolls this ahead to the book of John where they're fighting with the Lord about who he is. So he's saying, no, you guys are sons of the devil, not sons of Abraham. So we're seeing this hereditary evil still intact, You guys are the result of an illicit union. And then Swedenborg tacks on another 1,700 years to that and says, to this day, they're still that way. That still is there. Which, of course, is not to say that every Jew is bad and has this thing. Even in the Old Testament, in New Testament, we find good Jews like Joseph and Mary, and there's good Jews people around. But he is saying that this hereditary evil has certainly traveled down through the lines over hundreds and thousands of years. If you look at this next one, it's from the book Marriage, which is not to be confused with Conjugal Love. It's a small book called Concerning Marriage. And it tries to give us an explanation as to what this kind of relationship is. It says, those who read the word without doctrine, those who cannot avoid falling into many fallacies from the sense of the letter, which is in accordance with the appearances in man's sight, and who have at the same time absorbed many falsities and convinced themselves of them, and who at the same time are consequently proud of their own intelligence, these produce adultery as of a father with his daughter-in-law. So if we look at the story on the symbolic level of it, we say, okay, the adultery of a father with a daughter-in-law is having false beliefs from the word, taking them to be true, and acting an evil life because of it, and using it to be proud in our own smarts and our own intelligence. That is that illicit relationship. That's what's going on there. So it becomes very important to read the word with a proper doctrine, of an understanding, of how, what's your lens that you read it through? Do you read it through the lens that bad people need to be punished, and what God wants most is to punish the bad people? Or do you read it from the lens of, oh no, God wants amendment of bad people? That kind of stuff. How do you read these stories? But for us, I still see this about the long-term issues we have around hereditary evils, and how, you can spend your entire life fighting for the same thing because of the connection that you've had, and your parents had, and your grandparents, and going back, had this connection with this hellish society. That door's been opened, and the family can struggle for a long time to close that door, lock it down, and throw away the key. It's not easy. It's not easy. And so the final number we have here today is from TCR 521, talking about this thing. It says, this tendency and proneness to evils just mentioned, which is transmitted from parents to their children and descendants, can only be broken down by a person being born anew by the Lord's help, a process called regeneration. Without this, not only does the tendency remain unbroken, but it is reinforced by a succession of parents becoming more prone to evils and eventually to every kind of evil. This is why the Jews are still copies of their ancestor Judah, who married what? A Canaanite wife. You've seen this theme today, right? And fathered 3 lines of descendant by adultery with Tamar, his daughter-in-law. The hereditary has become so amplified in the course of time that the Jews are unable to embrace the Christian religion and believe it in their hearts. I say they're unable because their inner will in their minds resists, and it is this will which creates the impossibility. He goes on to couch that around saying impossibility. Well, unless they turn to the Lord and repent and all that kind of stuff. But what he also describes is the nature of hereditary evils, and he describes them and compares them to things like gangrene, where it gets in, it just slowly infects and kills the whole body, or a cancer or something like that. He doesn't compare it to the flu, which come and messes you up for a few days and you get better. He relates it to long-term, degenerative, spreading, nasty diseases. And you might spend your whole life fighting against something like that. And with a gangrene, unless you get rid of it entirely, it's going to come back. Which is why, they used to amputate arms and legs and things like that if you had it, because you got to get rid of all of it. You can't just get rid of enough of it. And this is a similar theme we see in the Old Testament when the Jews go in to take over the Holy Land. It's not, get rid of most of these guys. No. Get rid of all of these things. Wipe them out. Their sons, their daughters, their animals, everything. Get rid of everything. Because if you don't, it's going to come back just like gangrene and cancer and things like that. So, yeah, just to bring that home, it's hereditary evils are a big deal. And it's not just about a genetic link. It's about how we, raise our kids, and do we raise them with the same biases and prejudices and stuff that we had. And there's hereditary evil isn't just a genetic thing. It's a behavioral thing that we pass on. So I think the brief here is to make sure we keep an eye on those things, and that's why the Lord gives us the children that we have, because we should be alert and awake to the issues that we have in our life, and we say to our kids, hey, little Johnny, little Susie, I've been a whatever all my life, and you should watch out for this because, I was like this, your mom was like this, and my grandparents, and it's a big deal, because if you don't get on top of this, it's going to stick around in the family for a long, long time. You need to have your moment of, no, this stops here. Amen.